"You'll regret it, I won't obey," said the young native woman when the cowboy paid $2 for her. The small frontier town lay under a bright, unrelenting sun. Dust rose from the dirt streets with every step of a booted foot, and the wooden buildings creaked in the dry heat. Life here moved slowly, measured by the rhythm of horses' hooves, the ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, and the chatter of people in the market. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, yet the town was large enough that strangers still arrived from time to time, bringing stories of far-off places and new ways of life. Among the people living in this town was a young native woman, strong and proud, with eyes that seemed to see everything around her. Her hair, dark and glossy, fell in a long braid down her back, and her hands were skilled from years of hard work, weaving, stitching, and creating crafts to sell. She was known in the market not just for the quality of her work, but for the spark in her personality. She never bowed to anyone who tried to control her, and she had a sharp tongue for anyone who tried to underestimate her. Her family counted on her. She was responsible for her younger siblings, caring for them when her parents were busy or away. Despite her youth, she carried herself with dignity and confidence, a presence that made people take notice. On that particular day, the market was alive with activity. Merchants called out their prices, children ran between stalls chasing each other, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee mingled in the dry air. The young woman had set up her stall near the center, displaying beautiful handmade baskets, embroidered cloths, and beadwork that shimmered in the sunlight. She greeted the customers politely but firmly, her voice calm yet commanding. When a buyer tried to haggle too aggressively, she simply shook her head and walked away, knowing her work was worth every coin. It was in this bustling environment that a stranger appeared, tall, with the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face and boots that had clearly traveled many miles. The cowboy moved with a relaxed confidence, yet there was something about the way he looked around, careful and observant, that made him stand out from the other men in town. He carried himself with a certain ease, but there was no mistaking the strength in his build and the sharpness in his eyes. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, curious about this newcomer who seemed both alert and at home in the strange surroundings. The cowboy's attention was drawn to the young woman's stall. Her crafts were skillfully arranged, catching the light in ways that made them look more valuable than they perhaps were. But it was not just her work that caught his attention. There was a fierceness in her gaze, a stubbornness that intrigued him. Most people he knew would bow or flinch when faced with someone so confident, but she stood tall, unafraid, and met his eyes with the same intensity he felt in himself. He stepped closer to the stall, examining the baskets and beadwork as if he had a genuine interest in their quality. He selected a small, intricately woven basket and turned to her with a coin in hand. $2 for this, he said, placing the money firmly on the wooden counter. The young woman's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew the value of her work, and she knew that a stranger, even one who appeared wealthy or confident, might think he could simply pay and take what he wanted. "You'll regret it," she said, her voice low but clear. "I won't obey." The words startled him, not because of their boldness, but because of the determination behind them. Most people would have accepted the transaction quietly, taking the coin and the basket. But she was different. She did not see herself as someone who could be controlled by money or authority. Her words were a warning, a challenge, and an invitation all at once. For a moment, the cowboy simply smiled, intrigued rather than offended. He could see that she was not being rude for the sake of it. She was standing her ground with quiet dignity. There was a spark of respect that formed instantly, even if neither of them said it aloud. "I didn't mean to offend," he replied cautiously, lowering his hat slightly, revealing more of his face. "I just wanted to buy this basket. I like the work you've done." She studied him carefully, not yet trusting his words. Her life had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. Strangers often came with promises that carried hidden intentions. She had seen people try to take advantage of her or her family, and she had learned to protect herself through vigilance and cleverness. Her gaze flickered to the coin he had placed on the counter, then back to his eyes. "Buying a basket is one thing," she said, "but thinking money can make me do something I don't want, that's another." He nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken lesson. Money could buy items, but it could not buy respect or trust. "I see that," he said. "I don't want to take that from you. I just admire the skill, that's all." Their conversation drew a small crowd of curious onlookers. Children peered from behind their mothers, merchants paused in their business, and a few townsfolk whispered quietly to each other. They could sense the unusual nature of this encounter. The young woman was holding her own against someone who clearly had experience dealing with people, someone who might have expected submission or deference. The young woman's expression softened slightly, though her stance remained firm. "Then if it's admiration you want," she said, "you can have that but nothing else." The cowboy accepted the terms silently, realizing that any attempt to push further would only prove her point and earn his own embarrassment. He paid the coin, took the basket carefully, and studied it as he turned it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the weaving tight, and even the colors carefully chosen to reflect the patterns of her people. Each detail spoke of patience, of pride in one's work, and he could not help but feel respect growing deeper than mere curiosity. "What's your name?" he asked finally, genuinely interested. She hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Naya." "Naya," he repeated, tasting the sound of it. "I'm Jackson." They exchanged no more than that, yet the brief introduction carried weight. In a town where everyone knew everyone else, Naya and Jackson had created a small, private connection that neither fully understood yet. It was not friendship, nor was it trust. It was something that held the potential to grow into both. As the sun climbed higher, Naya returned to her work, but she could not ignore the presence of Jackson, who lingered nearby, speaking briefly with other merchants, yet always keeping an eye on the market and occasionally on her. She kept her movements purposeful, aware of the curious glances from those around her, but also aware that he had not tried to force her into anything. That mattered more than she would admit. Jackson, meanwhile, was fascinated. He had traveled widely, seen many towns, and met many people, yet this young woman was unlike anyone he had met. She carried herself with a rare combination of courage, intelligence, and independence. He understood that she would not be easily swayed, and that intrigued him even more. Respect, he realized, was not something to be bought. It was something to be earned, and he intended to learn how. The day wore on. Market noise faded as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Horses whinnied in the stables, merchants began to pack their goods, and families slowly made their way home. Naya carefully collected her remaining crafts, making sure nothing was damaged in the busy day. Jackson approached once more, this time with no coin in hand, only conversation. "I hope I didn't upset you earlier," he said quietly. "I only meant to pay for the basket. I didn't mean anything else." Naya looked at him for a long moment. Her gaze was steady, her mind sharp. "You didn't upset me," she said finally, "but remember this, don't ever think someone can be bought. It doesn't matter how much money you have. People like me, we don't belong to anyone." Jackson nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He understood, and in that understanding, a foundation was laid. They parted ways as the town's evening settled in, the dust of the day still hanging in the air, leaving behind the echo of a meeting that would not soon be forgotten. Naya returned home to her siblings, who greeted her with smiles and questions about her day. She was tired, yet satisfied. She had held her ground, defended her independence, and survived another day in a world that often underestimated her. And somewhere in the town, Jackson walked alone, the basket in his hands, thinking about the young woman who had refused to obey, and wondering what it would take to truly understand her. Neither of them knew it yet, but this encounter would mark the beginning of a story neither could predict. A story of courage, respect, and the slow, careful building of trust between two strong-willed individuals. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the small frontier town, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The market had already begun to stir, and merchants shouted their wares, trying to attract early customers. Naya walked through the familiar paths, carrying a basket of freshly made crafts. She had barely finished her morning chores at home, yet her mind was alert, always aware of people around her. Her siblings were safe with her mother, who had gone to trade some goods at a nearby stall. As Naya approached her usual spot in the market, she noticed the cowboy again. Jackson was leaning casually against the post of a shop, his hat pulled low, surveying the busy scene. He had not come for another purchase, not yet, but his presence was noticeable. He seemed at ease, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a kind of quiet determination that made her feel both curious and wary. She stopped a few steps away from him, tightening her grip on the basket. The encounter from the day before had lingered in her mind. She remembered his words, his calm demeanor, and the way he had respected her warning. Most men in this town would have tried to push to claim something that did not belong to them, yet Jackson had not. Still, she could not trust easily. Jackson noticed her pause and walked toward her, his movements unhurried, deliberate. "Good morning," he said, tipping his hat. "I didn't mean to bother you yesterday, I just wanted to admire your work." Naya's eyes narrowed slightly. "Admiration is one thing. Thinking admiration gives you the right to command me is another," she replied firmly. Jackson chuckled softly, but there was respect in the sound. "I understand. I wouldn't dream of commanding you." The market around them continued its usual chaos. Children ran between stalls, a horse whinnied near the stable, and merchants bartered loudly over prices. Yet in this small space, there was a tension between Naya and Jackson that seemed to slow time. They were aware of each other, cautious, testing boundaries without touching them. "You know," Naya said after a moment, her voice steady, "most men would pay money and expect obedience. That's what makes people think they can control others." She shifted slightly, her gaze scanning the market. "I'm not like most people." Jackson smiled faintly, as if impressed. "I've learned that," he said simply, "and I respect it. I think it takes courage to stand your ground like that." Naya hesitated, not used to receiving compliments from strangers, especially men. She was careful, measuring his words against his actions. "Courage doesn't mean you're safe," she said. "People can still hurt you even when you're careful. You never know who's going to take advantage." Jackson nodded, understanding the hidden warning. "I don't want to hurt you. I can see that you've earned the right to decide for yourself." For a few moments they stood in silence, the noise of the market surrounding them. Then Jackson gestured toward her crafts. "May I look at them again?" Naya considered for a moment. It was a small test, a way to see if he respected her boundaries. She nodded slightly, stepping back to let him examine the items. Jackson picked up a small basket, turning it over in his hands, noticing the careful weaving, the precise color patterns, and the craftsmanship that spoke of patience and pride. "These are remarkable," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I can tell how much care you put into them." Naya allowed herself a small nod. "Thank you, they're meant to last. I want them to be useful, not just pretty." The cowboy placed the basket back gently. "I can see that. It's rare to find someone who makes something with meaning and care." A few townspeople were now watching them closely. They whispered among themselves, curious about the unusual interaction. Some admired the young woman's courage, while others wondered what Jackson's intentions really were. Yet neither of them seemed to notice, or perhaps they simply ignored the attention. Then, as if on cue, a commotion erupted near the edge of the market. A horse had gotten loose, bolting through the crowd and causing people to scatter. Naya's eyes widened, and without thinking she moved toward the animal. Jackson followed immediately, his own instincts kicking in. The horse reared near her stall, narrowly missing a stack of crates. Naya acted quickly, stepping forward and holding her hands out calmly, trying to soothe it. Jackson approached from the other side, his voice firm but gentle. "Easy now, it's okay." Together, they managed to guide the horse away from the market, calming it enough for the rider to catch up and take control. The townspeople watched in awe, impressed by their coordination, though neither Naya nor Jackson had planned it. It was instinct, quick thinking, and respect for the animal that made it work. When the situation settled, Naya turned to Jackson, slightly flushed from the excitement. "That was unexpected," she said, her tone a mix of relief and surprise. Jackson shrugged, smiling. "It's all part of living in a town like this. You never know what's going to happen." He studied her for a moment. "You handled that very well." Naya felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected, respect. She had seen him act decisively, calmly, without trying to take control of her. For the first time, she realized he might not be like the others. He might actually understand the value of listening, watching, and acting with care rather than force. The day went on, and they continued to cross paths in the market. Jackson asked questions about her crafts, about her family, and about the techniques she used. Naya answered cautiously, aware that he was learning as much about her as she was about him. She noticed the patience in his manner, the genuine interest without pressure, and she could not deny that it made her curious. Yet she remained wary. She knew that appearances could be deceiving. People often said one thing and did another. She kept her boundaries firm, ensuring that while conversation was allowed, nothing else could be taken for granted. By midday, a misunderstanding arose. A merchant nearby had overheard Jackson speaking and assumed that he was trying to buy influence over Naya. He made a snide remark, suggesting that the young woman would obey once enough money was offered. Naya's eyes flashed with anger. "That is not true," she said sharply, standing tall. "I do not belong to anyone. Money cannot make me do anything I do not wish." Jackson stepped forward, placing a hand gently in the air to calm the growing tension. "She speaks the truth," he said, his voice firm. "You cannot assume things about her or about anyone without knowing them." The merchant grumbled, but the townspeople seemed to shift their attention, realizing that Jackson was not dismissive or condescending. Instead, he stood by Naya, not in a controlling way, but as someone acknowledging her autonomy. Naya's heart beat faster. She had seen men speak in many ways, some with charm, some with threats, but this was different. Jackson respected her choice even in public, something rare and precious in a town like this. As the market began to quiet, Naya packed up her remaining crafts. Jackson approached once more, this time with a small smile. "I hope you will forgive me for the commotion today," he said. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Naya shook her head. "It wasn't your fault, and you didn't try to control me, which I appreciate." He nodded. "Good. That is all I wanted, to understand and perhaps to learn." There was a moment of quiet between them, where neither spoke, yet words were exchanged through glances and understanding. They had begun to see each other not just as strangers, but as individuals who could challenge each other, respect each other, and perhaps, one day, trust each other. As the sun dipped lower, Jackson finally tipped his hat. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, not as a command, but as a promise. Naya watched him leave, feeling a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had seen many people come and go, some with good intentions, some not. Jackson was different. He had tested boundaries, respected them, and shown a kind of patience that was rare. And yet she reminded herself curiosity could be dangerous. She would remain careful. That evening, Naya returned home to her family. She told them little of the encounter, choosing instead to focus on the ordinary events of the day. Yet she could not shake the image of Jackson, the calm determination in his eyes, and the quiet respect he had shown. It was not often that someone arrived in their lives and made such an impression without demanding anything in return. Jackson, on the other hand, walked through the town streets as the sun set, thinking about Naya. He admired her courage, her intelligence, and her independence. He knew that earning her trust would not be easy, and he welcomed the challenge. Unlike most people he had met, she could not be bought, persuaded, or intimidated. That was what made her extraordinary. Neither of them realized it yet, but the events of the day had changed the rhythm of their lives. A quiet respect had formed between them, a foundation built not on wealth or power, but on character, courage, and understanding. The spark of tension, curiosity, and challenge would grow in the days to come, shaping a story that neither of them could yet foresee. For now, they both returned to their routines, each thinking of the other in a small, unspoken way. The frontier town continued its daily life, unaware of the connection that had begun, one that would test courage, independence, and respect in ways neither Naya nor Jackson could imagine. The next few days passed in a slow rhythm, with the town carrying on as usual under the hot sun. Naya continued her work at the market, tending to her stall, greeting customers, and making sure her siblings were cared for. Yet her mind often wandered to Jackson. She had seen many travelers come through the town, most of them leaving as quickly as they arrived, without leaving any trace of their presence. Jackson was different. He lingered not just physically, but in her thoughts. She found herself observing him as he moved through the market, speaking with merchants, and yet somehow always remaining aware of her presence. Jackson, too, thought of Naya constantly. He admired her independence, her courage, and the way she held her ground without arrogance or cruelty. He had met many people who were clever or skilled, but few who possessed both strength and kindness, and even fewer who did not allow either pride or fear to control their actions. He wanted to understand her, not to possess or control her, but simply to know her better. That, he realized, required patience and respect. One morning, Naya noticed Jackson standing near her stall as she was arranging her crafts. He greeted her with a slight nod, and she responded with a cautious smile. He did not approach immediately, simply observed, and that in itself was unusual. Most men would have tried to initiate conversation, but Jackson seemed content to wait, giving her space while showing that he noticed her. After a while, he stepped closer, holding a small bundle of cloth. "I thought you might like these," he said softly, offering them without expectation. "I saw them in another town and thought of your work." Naya hesitated, unsure what to make of the gesture. She could not remember the last time someone had thought of her in such a simple, genuine way. She accepted the cloth with a quiet nod. "Thank you," she said, keeping her tone neutral, though a small warmth touched her heart. They spoke then, slowly, carefully. Jackson asked about her life, her family, and her craft, and Naya answered with honesty, though always maintaining her boundaries. She spoke of the challenges she faced, the long hours of work, and the responsibility she carried for her siblings. She also spoke of her people, their traditions, and the pride she took in her heritage. Jackson listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He asked questions not to control her story, but to understand it. "You have a strong sense of who you are," he said finally. "I can see it in everything you do. That strength is rare." Naya's eyes softened slightly, though she remained cautious. "Strength doesn't always make life easier," she said. "It just means you have to carry more." Jackson nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I think you carry it well," he said. "Not everyone would." Days turned into a week, and their encounters became more frequent. Sometimes it was a brief conversation in the market. Other times it was a shared task, such as helping a merchant move a heavy load or calming a frightened animal. Through these small interactions, a pattern emerged: respect, patience, and understanding. They began to see each other not as strangers, but as individuals who could rely on each other in subtle ways. One afternoon, a sudden storm approached. Dark clouds rolled over the town, and a strong wind began to blow dust and debris through the streets. People scrambled to secure their goods and find shelter. Naya, caught off guard, struggled to cover her stall and protect her crafts. Jackson appeared as if sensing her difficulty and helped her secure the items. They worked together efficiently, neither taking control, neither giving orders, simply coordinating with mutual respect. When the storm finally broke, leaving a soaked but calm town, Naya turned to Jackson. "I didn't think anyone would help me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. "I'm not most people," he replied, smiling faintly, "and I thought it was the right thing to do." In that moment, Naya realized something important. He did not expect anything in return. He did not try to use his help as a way to gain favor or control. That honesty, simple as it was, mattered more than any words could express. She felt a cautious trust beginning to form, though she reminded herself not to let it grow too quickly. Trust, she knew, had to be earned. Over the next several days, their interactions deepened. Jackson began to share stories of his travels, not as bragging, but as a way to connect, to show the experiences that had shaped him. He spoke of distant towns, wide rivers, and mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Naya listened, fascinated, but also careful to observe the truth in his words. She was impressed by his experience, but she remained aware that stories could sometimes be exaggerated. In turn, Naya shared small stories of her own life, moments from her childhood, lessons learned from her family, and the traditions of her people. She found that Jackson listened differently than most. He did not interrupt or dismiss her experiences. He asked questions that showed genuine interest, not judgment. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the town, Jackson walked Naya to the edge of the market where the road stretched toward the hills. The quiet between them was comfortable, not forced. Naya noticed that he did not try to dominate the conversation or impose his presence. He simply walked beside her, sharing the space with respect. "You have a way of seeing the world," he said softly, "a perspective that many overlook. I've learned a lot just by watching how you act, how you handle yourself." Naya considered his words. They were true, but she did not know if she should accept the compliment fully. "I've had to learn quickly," she said. "Life doesn't wait for anyone to be ready." Jackson nodded, understanding more than she could express. "And yet you face it with courage. That's what I admire most." For the first time, Naya allowed herself a small smile. "I suppose it's easier to be brave when you have no choice." They paused at the edge of the market, looking out over the hills bathed in the evening light. It was a quiet moment, filled with unspoken understanding. Neither of them had to say much. The connection was growing naturally, built on respect and shared experience rather than force or expectation. The townspeople, who had once watched their interactions with curiosity and skepticism, began to notice a different pattern. Jackson was no longer just a stranger in town, and Naya was no longer just a young woman selling her crafts. Together, they demonstrated cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. People began to admire not only Naya's independence, but also Jackson's patience and thoughtfulness. One afternoon, a minor crisis arose. A young boy had wandered near the river and slipped, unable to climb back up. Naya reacted instantly, calling for help, while Jackson ran to support her efforts. Together, they managed to pull the boy to safety, coordinating without argument or dominance. Their teamwork impressed the small crowd that had gathered, and the boy's parents thanked them both profusely. Afterward, Naya turned to Jackson. "We work well together," she said lightly, a note of surprise in her voice. Jackson smiled. "It seems we do. But not because either of us tries to control the other. We just respect what the other can do." Naya considered this. It was true. They were learning from each other, not competing, not trying to dominate. There was a balance forming, subtle yet strong, a foundation of trust and understanding. As days turned into weeks, their respect for each other continued to grow. Jackson began to recognize the depth of Naya's character, the way she cared for her family, her skill and dedication to her work, and her ability to face challenges with courage. Naya, in turn, recognized Jackson's integrity, patience, and genuine kindness. One evening, as the market quieted and the town settled for the night, Naya reflected on the time that had passed. She realized that her feelings toward Jackson had shifted from cautious curiosity to a quiet respect, tinged with interest. He was not a man to be feared, nor someone she could easily predict. Yet she knew that trust had to be earned, and she felt that slowly he was proving himself worthy. Jackson walked through the streets alone that night, thinking about Naya. He admired her courage, independence, and strength. He knew that any relationship, friendship, or partnership would require patience and care. He was willing to wait, to earn trust not through words or gestures alone, but through consistent action and respect. By the end of this period, both Naya and Jackson had changed in subtle ways. Naya was still cautious, still protective of her independence, but she had begun to see that someone could respect her choices while also valuing her presence. Jackson was more aware of the strength it took to live in her world, and he had developed a deeper appreciation for patience, observation, and understanding. Neither of them spoke of feelings or intentions yet. That was not necessary. The bond they shared was built on respect, understanding, and shared experience, a bond that could grow into friendship, partnership, or more, but only if time and trust allowed. In the quiet of the night, each returned to their own home, carrying thoughts of the other. The frontier town slept under the stars, unaware of the connection that had formed between two strong-willed individuals. A connection built not on money, control, or expectation, but on courage, respect, and the slow, careful building of trust. And though neither could see the future, both knew in their own way that something significant had begun, something that would shape the days to come and test their courage, understanding, and respect in ways neither had yet imagined. The days turned into weeks, and the small frontier town continued its slow rhythm under the hot sun. Life seemed ordinary on the surface. Markets bustled, horses trotted through dusty streets, and the townspeople carried on with their daily routines. But beneath the ordinary, a quiet tension had been building, one that had begun with a single meeting between a young native woman and a traveler who refused to treat her as anything less than her own person. Naya continued to run her stall, carefully tending to her crafts while keeping an eye on her family. She had learned to balance her responsibilities with the growing curiosity she felt about Jackson. She thought about him often, but she reminded herself not to let curiosity turn into trust too quickly. Her independence was her strength, and she could not afford to give it away lightly. Jackson, meanwhile, moved through the town with his usual calm awareness. He had come to admire Naya not just for her skills or her courage, but for the way she carried herself in a world that often underestimated people like her. He had learned patience, understanding, and the value of respecting someone's boundaries. With each passing day, he grew more determined to earn her trust, knowing that nothing he could offer, no words, no gestures, no coins, would ever be enough on their own. One afternoon, an unexpected problem arose. A small fire had started near the edge of the town, likely from a dropped lantern. Smoke rose quickly, and townspeople began shouting and running to protect their homes and goods. Naya saw the danger immediately. Without hesitation, she grabbed a bucket and rushed toward the nearest flame, calling for help as she ran. Jackson was right behind her, moving with the same urgency. They worked together, coordinating without needing to speak much. Naya handed buckets of water to Jackson, who poured them onto the fire, while she moved to contain sparks threatening nearby stalls. The townspeople watched in awe as the two moved seamlessly together, neither trying to dominate the other, both focused entirely on the task at hand. When the fire was finally under control, Naya's chest heaved with exhaustion, but she smiled faintly. "That could have been much worse," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Jackson nodded, smiling back. "We made a good team, but not because either of us tried to lead. We just respected what each could do." Naya considered his words. He was right. They had accomplished something together, not through force or command, but through mutual understanding. The realization warmed her heart in a quiet way. It was rare to find someone who could respect her autonomy and still act with care and strength. Over the next several days, their bond continued to grow. They began to share more than just tasks. They shared stories, experiences, and small glimpses into their lives. Naya spoke of her childhood, the lessons she had learned from her parents, and the responsibilities she had taken on for her siblings. Jackson listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and never interrupting. In turn, Jackson shared stories of his travels, of distant lands and people he had met along the way. He spoke not to impress, but to connect, to show the experiences that had shaped him. Naya listened carefully, noting not just the stories themselves, but the honesty in his voice and the respect he showed for the people he described. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town in golden light, Jackson and Naya found themselves walking along a quiet path outside of town. The air was warm, and a soft breeze carried the scents of wildflowers from the nearby hills. They walked side by side, comfortable in the silence, each feeling the presence of the other without needing words. "You know," Jackson said quietly, "I've learned more from you than I expected, about courage, patience, and respect. You see the world differently than most people I've met." Naya glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "And you've surprised me, too. You don't try to control or own. You respect and you listen. That's rare." Jackson smiled softly. "I respect you because you've earned it. You don't give it lightly, and I wouldn't want it any other way." Naya felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she realized that trust could exist without fear, without pressure, and without compromise of her independence. Jackson was not trying to take anything from her. He was offering respect, understanding, and perhaps something more, though neither had yet named it. Their conversations grew longer, their interactions deeper. They began to share small moments of humor, quiet observations about the town, and even dreams for the future. Jackson spoke of towns he had seen, mountains he hoped to climb, and rivers he longed to explore. Naya shared her hopes for her family, the pride she took in her people's traditions, and the simple joys she found in her daily life. One afternoon, a messenger arrived at the market with news of a traveling merchant coming to town. The merchant carried goods that were rare and valuable, and the townspeople buzzed with excitement. Naya and Jackson decided to visit the merchant together, curious about the new items and the possibilities they offered. As they browsed the merchant's goods, Naya noticed Jackson paying careful attention not just to the items, but to her reactions. He asked questions, offered suggestions, and respected her opinions. She realized that he valued her insight and perspective, not as a means of control, but because he genuinely respected her mind. Afterward, they walked back toward the town, the sun casting long shadows over the dusty streets. Naya felt a quiet sense of peace. She had begun to trust Jackson, not blindly but thoughtfully. She had seen his integrity, his patience, and his care, and she knew that he would not betray her trust. That evening, a small celebration took place in the town square. People gathered to enjoy music, food, and the company of neighbors. Naya and Jackson found themselves side by side, sharing quiet conversation amid the lively festivities. They laughed together, exchanged stories, and even danced briefly, their movements comfortable and respectful. For Naya, it was a rare moment of joy, a chance to experience happiness without fear or hesitation. As the night grew darker, they walked back toward Naya's home. The streets were quiet, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. Jackson turned to her, his expression serious but gentle. "Naya," he said softly. "I want you to know something. I respect your independence, your strength, and your choices. I would never ask you to give up what makes you who you are. But I hope that one day you might allow me to be a part of your life, not to control it, but to share it." Naya looked at him, her eyes reflecting both caution and consideration. She had thought about this moment, about the possibility of trust, partnership, and respect. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Jackson, I cannot be bought, controlled, or commanded, but I see that you respect me. I see your patience, your understanding, and your care. And for that, I will allow you into my life, if only on the terms we both choose." Jackson smiled, relief and happiness shining in his eyes. "That is all I ask, nothing more, nothing less." They walked the remaining distance in comfortable silence, the understanding between them stronger than any words could express. Naya knew that trust and friendship would grow slowly, shaped by experience and mutual respect. Jackson knew that true connection required patience and consistency, not force or expectation. In the days that followed, their bond continued to strengthen. They worked together in the market, helped neighbors with tasks, and shared quiet moments outside the busy town. Each interaction deepened their respect for one another, creating a foundation of trust and understanding that could not be easily shaken. One afternoon, a small crisis arose when a wagon carrying supplies tipped over near the market. Naya and Jackson were among the first to respond. They helped lift the heavy load, coordinated efforts to secure the goods, and ensured that no one was hurt. The townspeople watched with admiration, recognizing not just their skill, but their cooperation, patience, and mutual respect. By the time the sun set, painting the town in shades of gold and orange, Naya and Jackson found themselves alone at the edge of the market once more. They looked at each other, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. They had faced challenges together, learned from one another, and grown in understanding and trust. Naya spoke first, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I trust you, Jackson. Not because you have given me anything, but because you have shown me respect, patience, and care. That is worth more than any coin or promise." Jackson took her hand gently, careful not to overstep, yet firm enough to show connection. "And I will continue to earn your trust every day, not by force, not by expectation, but by respect and honesty." They stood together as the stars began to appear in the night sky. The quiet of the town, the gentle sounds of evening, and the shared understanding between them created a moment of peace and possibility. For Naya and Jackson, the journey had been one of patience, courage, and mutual respect. They had learned that true connection could not be bought, commanded, or forced. It could only grow from honesty, care, and the willingness to see each other as equals. As they parted for the night, each returned home with a sense of fulfillment. Naya knew that her independence remained intact, strengthened by the trust she had allowed to grow. Jackson knew that his patience and respect had laid the foundation for a bond that could withstand time and challenge. And though neither knew exactly what the future would hold, they both understood that the choice to trust, respect, and honor one another had created something rare and precious. In the small frontier town, amid the dust, the sun, and the quiet rhythm of daily life, a story of courage, respect, and mutual understanding had reached its first meaningful resolution.